Welcome to the Raiders Uncovered. Raiders Unrivaled at Uncovered on the Undroppables Network. How you doing? Biggs here. Just hanging out and waiting on my bud, Raiderdamus, who's in the building. What's happening, Tyler?
Howdy, howdy. So I'm a little bit late. Had to scramble and get all my equipment set up here.
Sounds like me all the time. Let's get the show started. We got some introduction of a couple new segments,
All
some
right.
refining of some previous segments. I guess it's all just kind of whatever. What I was trying to say is that everything is a work in progress. We are constantly morphing, metamorphosizing, mutating, whatever. The show is always in flux. It's never a static thing. Um, and so I have everything's different today. Everything's different. And how did your week go?
My week was just fine. I'm getting ready for the 4th of July, having a good time, just chilling out.
What are you going to do on the 4th of July?
In my particular neighborhood, it is not legal to set off fireworks, but I'm going to listen to all the rednecks around me who don't care about the law set off theirs.
Hey, same. And we're trying to get my dog a thunder shirt because I guess it makes him feel good, but we don't know. We've never done it before. I don't know. Fuck all of you guys lighting off dynamite and shit. You scare my dog, and it makes it miserable for all of the dogs because I'm not the only person that has a dog. So just fuck you.
Yeah, I always grew up with a lot of dogs and cats around, so my family was never really big on setting off a lot of really loud fireworks or fireworks of any kind, because they were just miserable on New Year's and 4th of July. They had a really hard time. So my family, being the empathetic souls that they are, decided to forego fireworks.
I don't begrudge anybody trying to have some fun. Have some fun. Just don't make the dogs hurt. That's all I ask.
I agree.
Uh, all right, we do have kind of a theme today. Although later on we are going to get into our Mount Davis goats. The theme today is kind of defensive lineman. So I'm wearing my Swifty shirt.
I've got my Crosby here.
There you go, Max turning heads. So let's get into it. We are going to talk about the latest in Raider Nation. It's the state of the nation. Breaking news: John Gruden has continued his legal battles. He's been denied a court trial once again, and the Nevada Supreme Court has denied his appeal to not go to arbitration. Now, just to catch everybody up, John Gruden suing the NFL, wants to clear his name. He wants monetary damages. He claims that the leak of his emails and their subsequent publication by the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and pretty much everywhere else destroyed his career and cost him lucrative lucrative endorsement deals. And he definitely has a case. However, a judge ordered that he was to go to arbitration, and that arbitration is not necessarily on his side. Basically, arbitration means that Goodell or possibly a third-party arbitrator would preside over the case. So allowing the guy that the NFL or allowing the guy that Gruden is trying to like clear his name from to oversee everything is some funky ass shit. And so he appealed it. It went to the Nevada Supreme Court. The Nevada Supreme Court denied it, saying he needs to go to arbitration still, which means he has one last recourse, and that is the United States Supreme Court.
You know, if it does go to arbitration, I find it highly unlikely that Roger Goodell would sit in the arbitrator's seat. Even he isn't tone deaf enough to be like, we investigated ourselves and found no wrongdoing. I mean, that's the ultimate in corruption, and that's essentially what he's being accused of to begin with. So he doesn't want to give himself and the league a black eye. But the league mostly just doesn't want a black eye at all, which is why they want to go to arbitration, because I think people in general in the public understand that the NFL has some shady dealings going on, and that John Gruden, no matter what he may have said in a bunch of emails, and as awful and horrible as they may have been, is being railroaded here. I don't think that's really in question. Also, you're probably not going to find a group of 12 adult individuals in this country and not have several of them be rabid football fans. So it would be difficult for the NFL to get a fair trial anywhere in this country, except perhaps Alaska. So I think the NFL is doing their due diligence, but I think eventually John Gruden is probably going to have to take this to the highest court in the land.
Right. And, you know, the difference is going to be a jury would see the NFL's malfeasance, and they would most likely award John Gruden the maximum. I'm not going to bring politics into this show because politics and this show don't mix. That's a rhyme. I got bars. But it reminds me of the Alex Jones thing, the Alex Jones court case, right? So because it went to a jury trial and because the jury was able to see, okay, this was the damage done, what are we going to award? And again, this is not an endorsement for Alex Jones for one side or the other. This is just in this context. The jury saw this was the damage that was done, and they awarded essentially the most that they possibly could, which is fine. When you're talking about somebody who's a behemoth like the NFL or InfoWars or whatever, stick it to them, right? That's the way most juries would operate.
The same thing happened in that McDonald's court case like 40 years ago where the lady spilled hot coffee on herself. And the jury got a hold of the evidence when this lady had already been tried and convicted by the media of being an idiot. The jury saw what actually happened, and that McDonald's was completely negligent at having coffee about 80 degrees hotter than it should have been, and they've been warned about it and saw the damages that this lady incurred, which are unspeakable, and absolutely threw the book at McDonald's, as they well should have.
Right, and that's probably a less volatile example than the one that I brought up. But I got another one in the chamber. So that's what would probably happen with a jury is that the jury would see the NFL sucks and award John Gruden the max. What's going to happen with an arbitrator is the arbitrator is trying to like both sides the shit out of everything. And so an arbitration hearing would probably likely wind up for John Gruden somewhere in the middle, acknowledging that the NFL has caused him damage, seeing that this damage has cost him so many millions of dollars, but then also saying, well, you're not going to get all of what you're asking for. And so if you're on John Gruden's side, that's not the most ideal situation to be in. But if he does have the recourse of appealing it to the Supreme Court and he wants the Supreme Court to hear it, and this is the last politics I'm going to get into, he should make a large contribution to the Donald Trump for president in 2024 campaign and let the Supreme Court know about it, short of, buying Clarence Thomas a motorhome or, inviting Justice Alito on his yacht, whatever. This Supreme Court can be bought and should be able to do that. But that's all I'm going to say. I don't need to.
I listen. I just hope he wins because I mean the thing is in this country we have our laws to set up where it's like this. No matter what you did or how bad it was what you did, the courts are not going to railroad you.
Right.
You're going to get due process. You're going to get a fair trial, and you're going to get an impartial judge, jury, and executioner. And John Gruden hasn't had any of those things, and I hope he gets them.
I do too. As much as I don't want John Gruden to be the coach of the Raiders again, I want him to win. They're equal desires on my part.
Agreed.
All right. Message. Well, not message. As reported by Hondo Carpenter, over on the radio, the Raiders Today, Sports Illustrated, whatever, a dying antelope in the vast savannah. He reported on a ranking by the 33rd team, and now I have my issues with the 33rd team, and I don't mind getting into them. The 33rd team is a statistical analysis based service, and in a lot of my writing and stuff, I've used them because they had a pretty cool tool that got into a lot of like really obscure statistical analysis. Like you could sort wide receiver catches based on catchable throws, based on lineup on the field, based on where they were targeted in, down the field, whether it was short or long or whatever. So, so you could get into a lot of like really, really deep. It was just a fun tool to play with, and they had some really, really good writers, and then they got bought out, and then all of a sudden they didn't have those really good writers anymore. And like one of the best ones, Josh Larkey, came over, and he's working with us at Player Profiler now. And what happened over at the 33rd team really left a bad taste in my mouth. And so does this. The 33rd team's Ian Valentino believes the Raiders have the 10th worst roster in the league. The extremes of the Las Vegas Raiders will make them a fun team to watch in 2024. Regardless of the quarterback under center, they'll have to strongly lean into the strengths of an offense with an unproven running back stable and lack of depth at receiver. The good news is Davante Adams, Brock Bowers, and Michael Mayer are fully capable of providing big plays. I want to push back on that.
I agree. I don't think any reasonable person can look at the Raiders roster and say it's the 10th worst in the league. That's patently absurd.
It is absolutely absurd. There is no criteria except talking about depth, and we've talked about depth on this show, and the Raiders are deep.
Yes, they are. They're deep at several crucial positions as well.
Do they have 3-star running backs? No. They have a guy who is on the brink of stardom and a couple guys that can fill in and do good things. Do they have rock stars at wide receiver? Absolutely. And they have 3 really good wide receivers and 2 of the best tight ends that we've seen in a long time. So where do you get this no depth at receiver?
Probably from the fact that after Jacoby Myers and Davante Adams, people who don't follow the Raiders have no idea what the Raiders roster consists of. But we do because we follow the Raiders, and so we have a more informed opinion. But like if you asked me who's the 3rd receiver on the New York Jets, I don't have any idea. And that's the position that people well, you're a fantasy nerd, so you think about that kind of thing, right before you go to sleep at night.
True.
I don't necessarily do that. And I think a lot of national writers don't do that either. Trey Taylor is a guy who's really good, but even after that, I couldn't tell you who the Raiders' 4th receiver is going to be. Is it going to be Michael Gallup? I don't know. Is it going to be?
Oh my God!
One of those guys that we have as undrafted free agents? Maybe. Who knows? So it's entirely possible that the Raiders' 4th receiver, who emerges this year, is somebody who hasn't been on the team before, or who. It's entirely possible that Michael Gallup I think it's equally possible that he flames out or he becomes something special. So, I mean, it's the Raiders' depth chart is, I think, good, but volatile enough to not believe in if you're an outside observer.
I apologize. I got giddy there for a second because Raiderdamus just pulled a Biggs. It's Trey Tucker. And I do.
What did I say? Did I say something wrong?
You said Trey Taylor.
I did. Well, he's a rookie safety. I know who that is.
I do that all the time, so it just made me feel closer to you. All right. Yeah, and you brought up the fact that he's a national writer. Isn't that his job? He's a national writer. He's supposed to know national things.
He is supposed to, but when we know that national writer means Los Angeles and New York writer, don't we?
Sure. Okay.
He could probably tell you all about the Rams. He could tell you all about the Giants. Couldn't tell you shit about the Jaguars, probably.
I can do that too. All right. Moving on. Sporting News reports before they selected tight end Brock Bowers with the number 13 overall pick in the 2024 NFL Draft, the Las Vegas Raiders reportedly had a trade offer on the table from a team looking to move up for the Georgia product. This comes from Vic Tafer of The Athletic, although he did not say what team was making the offer, nor did he reveal what the actual offer was.
Well, I've heard this before. I've heard that the Rams were trying to trade up with both the Jets and the Raiders to get Bowers, and were unsuccessful in doing so.
Yeah, according to Ari Meroff of the 33rd team, Los Angeles offered the New York Jets their first, second, and third round picks in exchange for the number 11 selection and a sixth rounder, and they were trying to jump up to get Bowers. So, fuck you. We have him. You don't.
Yeah, I if I were in the Raiders front office, I would not have listened to a deal like that. The Brock Bowers versus those picks, I would take the generational player over those picks.
Absolutely. Okay, this doesn't cause me any concern at all. However, it is a concerning report. And again, we're at the point in the NFL season where it's just like, shut the fuck up, you guys. A new report on what happened during the Las Vegas Raiders practices this spring is even more troubling for fans hoping for competent quarterback play in the upcoming season. The Raiders are set to have a quarterback battle between Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell during training camp. Minshew is the betting favorite to win the job. However, reports coming out earlier this spring were worrisome for an offense that either needs to take advantage of Davante Adams' expensive contract or trade him before his deal becomes untenable next year. So already you can tell the bias in this piece. As previously discussed, Tayshaun Reed reported that the offense had numerous issues this spring as they took their first reps in new offensive coordinator Luke Getsy's system. Reed called the Raiders' quarterback situation concerning before training camp. Both quarterbacks struggled to push the ball downfield, had too many off-target throws, and frequently put the ball in harm's way. The Raiders will need better than that to avoid the offense being a liability yet again. The good news is there's still plenty of time for O'Connell and Minshew to get better in training camp before the season arrives.
Yeah, this is the kind of writer who has New York Jets bed sheets on his race car bed in his mom's basement and just really, really, really wants Davante Adams to be traded to the Jets so that he can write about Adams and Rodgers together for the next, 18 months until Rodgers retires or dies or disappears into a black hole or whatever is going to befall him. This is wishful thinking on anyone's part that the Raiders are not going to have Davante Adams on their team next year or the week or the year after or any of this. His contract is not untenable. The Raiders have plenty of cap space right now, and it's not that big of a problem. I mean, they can deal with it if they need to. Tom Bledsoe's good at that, and the Raiders have cap people in their front office who are good at that. It's absurd.
It's all cap magic anyway. Like, stop.
The Chiefs have proven that the cap is a myth. I mean, you could do whatever you want. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, this is from Jordan Sigler. Jordan Sigler is a sports journalist. He writes about sports. I hope
that should be in quotation marks, sports journalist.
He writes about sports for Wisconsin Sports Heroics, Chi City Sports, and Gridiron Heroics. His craft has been nationally syndicated for Yardbarker, MSN, and Bleacher Report. Basically, this guy is an aggregator.
Those are bastions of journalistic integrity. Those three organizations right there.
Right. He's he's an aggregator. So basically, he just like scours the web, kind of like what I'm doing right now, and then reports what Tayshawn and the other beat writers are already talking about. So yeah, and then he throws in a little bit of opinion on his own. Okay, next one. This is from Vic. We are 3 weeks away from the start of the Las Vegas Raiders training camp. God, 3 weeks. Give me something. And everyone is feeling good, right? The players are definitely happy as they are confident they can build off last season's strong finish under Antonio Pierce, 5-4, 3 wins in the final 4 games. The defense added tackle Christian Wilkins, while the offense drafted a couple of starters and tight end Brock Bowers and guard Jackson Powers Johnson. It's just different this year, Mayer said. The Raiders have quite a few promising defenders that need to be extended. Kuntz, Hobbs, Spillane, Diablo, Epps, and Merrig. Who do you feel the team is prioritizing, trying to extend before free agency? Asked by Brandon S. And basically, Kuntz seems to be the obvious first player in line. We've talked about that before. Like he's got to get the bag. But we just talked about Cap Magic. I think they're gonna hang on to everybody except for Epps.
Yeah, I think they might let Spillane go if Eichenberg shows that he can slip into that role, because that's essentially what he was drafted to do.
Okay.
I think the Raiders can do better than Epps right now by signing the free agent Justin Simmons. I don't think. I mean, Epps plays a very vital role in this team by being basically the captain of the defense. He calls a lot of the plays, does a lot of the formations, and he's sort of the brain of the defense right now. But I think there are players who could do that and do that better. The problem is that we saw what happened to the Eagles when they let Marcus Epps go. Their defense went from elite to not very good in his absence. I'm not sure exactly how much of that was due to him not being there, but it wasn't a small amount. So my concern is replacing him with someone who isn't as good. If you're going to have the plan where getting rid of Marcus Epps is a part of your plan, then the other part of your plan better be getting someone better than him to replace him, because he's not a replacement level player.
I mean, that's standard across coaching staffs and personnel and all that stuff. All right. So moving on to Bleacher Report. According to Christopher Knox of Bleacher Report, he thinks the team may not be done making roster changes this season. He chose 3 players on the Raiders' current roster that he believes could be traded. Number 1, Malcolm Kuntz. Don't think so.
Absurd.
Adam Butler.
The Raiders' depth at that particular position in the defensive line isn't enough where Adam Butler is fungible. I think he'll be on the team through the season.
And Michael Mayer. Let me drink from my Michael Mayer cup. All right. Whatever. It's just everything is bullshit. It's all speculation. It upsets me. It makes me think of when Tom Brady was going to be the next Raiders quarterback. It's just people just fucking writing because that's their job and they have to do that. And I understand that and it's fine, but God damn, stop it.
I do have the experience in my life of trying to write a story when nothing was happening. And eventually you get to the point where you're just making stuff up. So I feel the pain of these people who have to, prove their own existence by writing, but it still is worthless to the average reader. And that is the problem, because you want to write something that people will be interested in writing and that's worth reading. And that is incredibly difficult when nothing is actually happening.
Yeah, so you have to make shit up, and it's so instead, why don't you just like slander some people? Isn't that better?
Well, that's what I do.
I know, that's what I'm saying. All right. Let's pay some bills real quick. Go to underdog.com, underdog fantasy, and play fantasy best ball. It's pretty fun. Basically, what you do is you draft your team, and then that's your team. You don't make changes every week. It's just who scores the best each week, and then you win money. And also, you can play daily pick'ems and stuff like that. I win pretty often, and I enjoy it. So you wake up in the morning and you look at the pitching probables and be like, I think this guy can have 18 outs. I think this guy can have over 7 strikeouts. And then you have money in your bank account at 10 o'clock at night. It's pretty cool.
You'd have won a lot of money if you'd had Hayden Birdsong on your team today against the Braves.
Yes, what a win. That was beautiful. And Elliot Ramos, he's absolutely been one of the 10 best hitters in all of baseball this season. Giants have been kind of fun to watch the last 6 days. The Brett Wisely walk-off was pretty great, and Elliot Ramos continuing to mash is good. So go to Underdog Fantasy, use code UNDROPPABLES, and they will match. I think I said it was they'll match up to I think what it is now is you can deposit up to $250. You can deposit up to $125, and they'll match it. I don't remember, because my boss over at Player Profiler said that it was you can put in 250 and they'll add another 125. I think that's what it was. So you start off with 375, because the big money tournaments, it's been a lot of small money tournaments for most of this offseason, and the big money tournaments are going to be coming, which is why you want more. So use the code UNDROPPABLE and get free money. All right. It's time for, and this is a new one, and I'm pretty proud of this. So before what we were doing was we were talking about the player of the week. You know what rhymes with player?
Slayer.
It's time for the Slayer of the week. I love that so much.
That's great.
Rest in peace, Jeff Hanneman. Okay, who is your Slayer of the week?
My Slayer of the week is none other than the Raiders' starting running back, a guy who sometimes is forgotten because the Raiders have made some additions to their running back position in this offseason, like Dylan Laube and Alexander Madison. But the starting running back remains Mr. Zamir White. Now, I know that in the fantasy realm, when I was coming up, the focus was on having running backs. You want to take a running back in the first round, you want to take a running back in the second round, then you want to go from there. These days, it's not so much. These days, you take a wide receiver, maybe in the first 2 rounds, maybe you take a quarterback in there somewhere. Running back, because there's so many running back by committees, and because the percentage of passes versus runs has gone up, and up in the last several years, the focus has shifted more to the passing game. But if you want 1,000 yards rushing, and if you want 10 touchdowns from your running back number 2, or perhaps running back number 1.5, or even a flex, take Zamir White. He showed up to camp looking like a Greek god, absolutely buff like a G.I. Joe from a comic in the 80s. He looks fantastic. Now, without pads on, we can't really tell how well he's going to do against the Raiders' defensive line, but I can guarantee he's going to blow through most defensive lines in this league. I think you can count on Zamir White for at least 1,000 yards, probably more like 1,200, and double-digit touchdowns. I think he's going to have a massive year. He proved in the last several games of the Raiders season last year that he can handle the load, he can handle the rock, like Josh Jacobs had before him. He is just the latest in a long line of premier Raider running backs. And with the passing game in the condition that it is right now, with a new system coming in, especially one that's going to run 2 tight ends a lot, that is the recipe for success for the running game. That's what the Chicago Bears had under Luke Getsy the last couple of years. That's what the Raiders are going to have. You want to bank on people who are likely to have success, and that means Zamir White.
I love that you brought up fantasy. It's a wheelhouse, and I have been planting flags all over the fantasy space across multiple platforms, banging the drum for Zamir White. And I've said on this show, and I'll say it again, if you take his 4.2 yards per carry average in the 4 games that he started with Jacobs out, and then you take his average of 21 carries per game, and you extrapolate that over a 17-game season, he's in the range of 1,500 yards rushing. Add to that 3 to 4 targets per game, which puts him in the realm of 60 targets, and he is going to be a fantasy smash. I can't talk about touchdowns. I hope he gets a lot of goal line work. I hope that we're able to like get into the red zone and play smash mouth football. As far as what an outside zone scheme will give you, and he's going to get vultured on a couple of rushing touchdowns by Brock Bowers, I think. He's not in danger of 12 rushing touchdowns from Aiden O'Connell, but touchdowns are not a thing that in fantasy we say they're not sticky. They don't carry over. They're not predictable. You can have 2 touchdowns one season and 12 the next, and then go back to 7. So they're not a reliable statistic based on history to say, well, he scored this many touchdowns the last year, so he should this year. Even if it's somebody whose volume is not really changing very much. But that said, if you're getting 20 carries a game, it means that you're going to have the ball a lot. It means that you're going to have the ball at the goal line a lot. It means that Zamir White is going to get some smash mouth carries and increase. I think he only had 1 rushing touchdown or two rushing touchdowns in those 4 games. But that's not a big enough sample size to extrapolate, and it's touchdowns anyway. So I like what you said. And I think he's going to have, an average amount of rushing touchdowns. Okay, just because I love this so much, I'm going to do it again because this is my Slayer of the Week. All right. I said that there was a theme to the show, and it was defensive line. And with that said, there were a few Raiders who were hanging out at the Sack Summit with Max Crosby and the dude from Buffalo that used to play for the Broncos. God, I'm so dumb sometimes. The guy with glasses, I totally forgot his name.
Von Miller?
Thank you, Von Miller. Oh, my God. I just thought of I went, it was a game at the Coliseum, and we were on the way down, and we went to AM/PM, and I was like, I wonder what we were picking out our drinks, and I grabbed Four Loko Gold because I didn't know what the flavor of gold was. And so we got down to the Coliseum, we're tailgating, and I drank a couple Four Lokos, and then my brother opened a bottle of bourbon, and I drank about half of the bourbon, and I was shit-faced. So we go into the game, and our seats were they were in the very last row behind the end zone. Great seats, best seats ever, because you can see everything in front of you. You got the wind, so it's not cool even in the sun, so it's cool even in the sun. And they were $25 a seat. So my brother and I were like, fuck it. We had 4 seats every year. So we're sitting there, and there was a dude who was about 3 rows in front of me, and he was wearing a Von Miller jersey. And I was giving it to him the entire time, just standing up behind him, just going, I'm going to fuck you in the ass, Von Miller. Fuck you, Von Miller. Just the whole time. And you know how the posture when you can tell that somebody is trying to not look, he just kind of sat there and he was frozen. He wasn't like natural or anything. He was just like, it was everything he could do not to turn around. Middle of the 4th quarter, his girlfriend finally turns around and gives me this look that's just like, would you shut the fuck up? And I was like, I'm sorry. and I stopped. But it was a Von Miller jersey. And then there was a dude next to me who was wearing a Von Miller jersey, and he was cool as fuck. And we just chatted the whole game, and I didn't give him any shit whatsoever, which is how hammered I was. And so that's what I think of when I think of Von Miller. And it was like 2016, 2017 when we obliterated the Broncos. There was one game in particular where we just absolutely destroyed them, scored like 45 points or something like that. It was It was a boat race.
Is
And
that like the infamous 56-14 game where there's like the screenshot of Darren McFadden just laughing on the sidelines with the final score displayed? Because I use that image a lot.
no, this was like 16-17. This was like the Derek
Okay.
Carr, Khalil Mack. And
Oh, that one.
yeah, and it was a bloodbath, and I would not let up on this dude. Anyway, talking about defensive linemen, we had the Sack Summit this week. Max Crosby was there, Malcolm Kuntz was there, Christian Wilkins was there, and my Slayer of the Week was there. I'm talking about Tyree Wilson. Tyree Wilson, friend of the show, former guest Kenny King Jr. on the program. I asked him to give me guys that were going to break out. And he specifically said Isaiah Polamau on the defensive side and Michael Mayer on the offensive side. This is, of course, pre-Brock Bowers draft pick. But we got to talking about Tyree Wilson. And his take on Tyree Wilson, like, you know, being around the building and everything, he was like, look out for this kid. Because when he came in, he was hurt. And it took him a while. And so basically what he did was he just absorbed everything. And when you're around Max Crosby, absorbing everything is absorbing literally everything. He got the work ethic down. He got the scheming down, everything. And it showed this week in the Sack Summit. He looked like an absolute monster. Right? He has added weight. He's already 6'6", 271 pounds. He was the seventh round pick seventh round. He was the seventh pick in the first round 2 years ago. And he was challenged last year. He added probably 8 inches to his biceps. He is like fully vascular and also has like huge stretch marks. He's been like going so hard and he's going to have a huge year. So with that, he's my Slayer of the Week.
Yeah, I think people forget about Tyree Wilson because he's a first round pick when everyone thought we should have taken, Jalen Carter. And
Jalen Carter
should have, be honest with you. But he didn't really, Tyree Wilson didn't play a lot last year. But anybody who's watched his Texas Tech film, like I have, knows this guy is an absolute monster and a wrecking ball. And when he gets fully healthy, as I assume he is right now, he's going to be very, very, very hard to stop. And with the Raiders' defensive line in the amazing shape that it is in, he's just a cherry on top of the ice cream sundae for that group. They're going to be very hard to slow down.
Yeah, I mean, you have to like employ chip blocks and double teams and shit like that. Who are you going to do that to? You don't have 8 people on the line to be able to do that. 7 at the most. It's gonna be violent. I can't wait to watch these kids. Max is the godfather, and he's just taking these kids into battle, and they're just gonna be so violent and dangerous. It's gonna be great.
I think teams are going to have to max protect an awful lot against the Raiders next year, which severely limits your options on offense as to how you can attack that defense. And so I think the Raiders secondary is going to feast just because of the presence of the Raiders defensive line. And I think, honestly, max protect is not going to help that much because we have guys with such high motor on the defensive line. You could only block them for so long with so many people. You're going to have to keep 2 tight ends in just to block most of the time. The amount of wide receivers you can send on patterns is going to be minimal. This particular Raiders defense is going to severely limit how other teams can successfully attack them.
Yeah, and what I can't wait for is all of the interceptions that are going to come from floaters of quarterbacks getting hit and still throwing the ball, and it's just a wounded duck floating through the air. All of the targeted stuff that's going to be coming from Jack, I think that we're going to have probably a huge increase in the number of interceptions that we have. The Raiders have never really been a big interception team. they're never like one of the leaders. They never have one of the guys that like has 8-10 since Lester Hayes. There have been guys who were good, Nnamdi Asomugha, Charles Woodson. There have been incredible defensive backs, but they've never as a team been a big interception as a turnover team. And I think that's gonna change a lot this year.
Well, not since we had the GOAT safety Reggie Nelson on our team have we had somebody who you can count on for a clutch interception at the right time.
Or to get burned for 80 yards just about every time.
That too.
God, he was remember a couple minutes ago when I was talking about the seats that we had?
Yes.
Those were the worst seats to watch Reggie Nelson from, because when the other team was coming our way, we could watch him like you're watching all 22 film. We would watch him just be like out of position and get burned and take a bad route, and then all of a sudden everybody's behind him. And it's like, Reggie, come on. He did do some good things. He was great like in end zone protection. Like short, real close up, like his coverage wasn't bad, but if you got him out into open space, he never took a good angle and he was slow.
Well, the thing about Reggie Nelson is you cannot get burned deep if the opponent is on the 5-yard line. So he used that to his advantage with regularity.
Yeah, exactly my point. All right, so we got Tyree Wilson and Zamir White, two very worthy slayers of the week. Now let's go on to the Mount Davis Goats, the Mountain Goats. And I got a little slide presentation. I'm proud of that too. But first, it's the theme song. Shout out, Al, your flame will burn eternal. Okay. So it's time for the Mountain Goats. Oh, let me change this thing. We got the Goats of Mount Davis at wide receiver. See, I put little goats in there.
Hey, there they are.
Also, it's a Mount Rushmore thing.
So, indeed, yeah.
Since we're only doing 2 this week, we're going to do 2 more next week. I like that.
Sounds great. Sounds great.
And it's Al Davis at the top of Mount Davis. All right. So, first one is going to be your wide receiver GOAT. Your first one.
Right.
Who is it?
My wide receiver GOAT is possibly one of the greatest wide receivers of all time. The Raiders in their history have 2 players for whom major collegiate position awards are named after. One of them is the punting award, named for Mr. Ray Guy. But the other one is named after this player. That is the Fred Biletnikoff Award, named for the best wide receiver in any given college season. Now, Fred Biletnikoff, you may be a little too young to know, but in the early 60s, he was a wide receiver for the Florida State Seminoles. And in fact, he led them to their very first win over the Florida Gators. One of many, unfortunately. I am a Gator fan, but he played for the Seminoles and was, absolutely just dismantled anybody that he played. He played in mostly his first varsity year was 1963. In that particular year, he played on both sides of the ball, and he led the team in both receptions and interceptions. He was instrumental in the foundation of the success that Florida State would come to have in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Fred Biletnikoff was there for the very beginning of it, and he played for the Raiders from 1965 to 1978 and was one of the best receivers in AFL history, and then was one of the best receivers in NFL history. Pioneered the use of stickum, rubbing this sticky adhesive stuff all over his body so that the ball would not fall off of him, and he taught this to Lester Hayes, and then in 1981, the NFL banned the use of stickum because the Raiders can't have any fun. So here's to you, Fred Biletnikoff. You're the greatest of all time. We love you.
Awesome. Love Fred Biletnikoff. And real quickly, I want to shout out a YouTube channel that I'm a huge, huge fan of. It's called Dave Volsky's Backdoor. Dave, Volsky, Volsky's Backdoor. And the YouTube address thing is at Dave Volsky's Backdoor 5673. DAVEVOLSKYSBACKDOOR 5673. Somehow he only has 31,000 subscribers, which is insane because what this guy posts is remastered NFL games from history. So I go in and I just type into the search Raiders, and the first ones that pop up: 1973 AFC Championship, Raiders at Dolphins, color corrected to 1080 and 10 color corrected and in 1080p.
Is that 19, the See a Hands game?
I don't remember. That's not one that I watched. And in his description, he says, "I've denoised the original source copy of the game and have color corrected the second half, which was off color and had a pinkish hue. The overall color has also been enhanced." Next up, 1972 Jets at Raiders Week 13 enhanced ABC broadcast. There's 11 videos. 1983 enhanced NFL. 1977 Vikings at Raiders Week 13. 1975 Raiders at Dolphins. And there 1974 AFC Championship, Steelers at Raiders. Just, I mean, there's so many. The coldest game coldest game ever, the Cleveland Kenny King game, that's on there too. So just search Dave Volsky on YouTube and subscribe, because I even watched some of the non-Raiders stuff. 1977 Raiders at Rams, which was apparently a huge Ray Guy game. I get to 78 Seahawks at Raiders Week 13. This is a Kenny Stabler game. I get to watch some of my guy Mike Wise, some of the stuff that he did in the 80s. So it's pretty cool. Monday Night Football 1979 Week 14 Raiders at Saints. One of the most boring games I've ever seen. It was terrible. Terrible. Yeah, the Saints were bad, and the Raiders didn't do a whole lot. So Dave Volsky, go find him. All right. My first Goats of Mount Davis wide receiver is a no-brainer, Mr. Timmy Brown. All right, let's get into this. Tim Brown, Notre Dame, drafted in 1988. It was as the Raiders were still in Los Angeles, but just trying to they were trying to be competitive, but they really couldn't get a good quarterback. Tim Brown, raised in Texas, goes to Notre Dame. And one of the biggest things about his time at Notre Dame is that he was considered a really good kick returner. So he came over and he was one of the kick returners for the Los Angeles Raiders, and it really kind of he made his mark. Rookie season wasn't great. He started in 9 games, 725 yards and 5 touchdowns. I mean, that's pretty damn good for a rookie season. I spend my time in the fantasy space watching rookies and trying to project and stuff like that. And if a guy has over 600 yards, it portends success down the road. He was 4th in the AP Rookie of the Year voting and made the Pro Bowl as a rookie. Injuries in the second season, didn't start. He wasn't a starter in his 3rd season. It wasn't really until he had been in the league for about 5 years that he had his breakout. His 6th year in the season, age 27, 1993, started all 26 games, had 127 targets, 80 catches, 1,180 yards. It was his first 1,000-yard season, and 14.8 yards per reception and 7 touchdowns. His best years were 1995. He had 1,342 yards and 10 touchdowns. He had 104 catches in 1997 and 1,408 yards, which was his career high. And then 2000, 1,128 touchdowns, or 1,120. That would be a lot of touchdowns. 1,128 yards, and finished with 11 touchdowns, which was his career high. And that he finished his career with over 1,000 catches for just under 15,000 yards and exactly 100 touchdowns. I guess one of those was with Tampa Bay.
It was.
All time, he ranks 7th in career receptions. He had 6 seasons in the top 10. He He's 92nd in career receiving yards per game, 20th in career touchdowns, 22nd in career yards from scrimmage. In 1988, he led the league in kick return yards and kick returns, yards per touch, and he had he was second with a 97-yard long kick return. He was also returning punts that year, and he was a beast. And there are a couple guys that I look at, and their careers remind me a lot of Tim Brown. The first one is Adrian Beltre, and the other one is Frank Gore. Adrian Beltre, of course, is a baseball player. But there's one thing that kind of one tie that binds all three of those guys, and it's like they're never this spectacular. They're never the guy where if you ask somebody who's the best out there, they're never going to say Tim Brown. They're never going to say Frank Gore. They're never going to say Adrian Beltre. But those guys were consistent, and they were consistently in the top. And when it came to the twilights of their careers, and you look back, you go, wow, that's a fantastic career. And Tim Brown is a Hall of Famer. He is my GOAT of Mount Davis at wide receiver for this week.
It reminds me a little bit of Hank Aaron, to be honest with you. Hank Aaron never hit like 50 home runs in a season. He just played forever. And he was consistently good every single year that he played. And eventually the counting stats add up, and you're the greatest of all time. And that, I think, it has a lot to do with Tim Brown's career. He was never like a guy you could point to and say he's the best because Jerry Rice exists. But Tim Brown is one of the greatest Raiders of all time and one of the greatest wide receivers of all time just because of his consistency. You can count on the guy. And a lot of the time he was like the entire Raiders offense because they had almost nothing else, and he still performed.
He made Jay Schrader and Jeff Hostetler look good. And that was pretty hard to do. And he was constantly in, I mean, everybody was in Jerry Rice's shadow. Everybody was in Chris Carter's shadow. I want to look real quickly, and let's look at the career. All right. So this wide receiver that I'm thinking of was also drafted in 1988, and he finished his career with almost 3,000 fewer yards than Tim Brown and 35 fewer touchdowns. And I'm sure a lot of people would say that Michael Irvin was a better wide receiver than Tim Brown. Tim Brown had a longer career, and he had more of everything. But everybody knew Michael Irvin was a superstar. Tim Brown was just a really good player on a bad team.
Michael Irvin had two advantages over Tim Brown. Number one was he won 3 Super Bowls, and number two was Alvin Harper. Michael Irvin never had to be like that consistent guy who would catch 12, 15 balls a game. He could catch 5 or 6, and Alvin Harper would catch like 8, and the Cowboys would win just because they would bulldoze whoever they were playing. Tim Brown never had that luxury with the Raiders.
I don't know. I don't think that James Jett shade will stand.
Well, James Jett was great, but I mean, he's not in Alvin Harper's league.
No. And that's the thing. When you're talking about the Cowboys, they put their finger on drafting and free agency in the early 90s, and it carried them. And the Raiders took a while to catch up. All right. So it's time. It's time, everybody. It's time. Let me get rid of this. It's time for Raiderdamus's Hall of Shade.
All right, and here we go. It is a known and accepted fact that the video game character with the highest kill count, who has tortured and murdered gamers more than any other in history, is the first Goomba you encounter in the first level of Super Mario Bros. On the Nintendo. Super Mario Bros. Was released in 1985 and was in all likelihood the first home video game played by a majority of players at the time. They, not knowing how to deal with an on-screen enemy, simply walked right into it or stumbled their way around until it caught up to them. And these burgeoning gamers, one can imagine, became salty and tilted, expressing their anger and frustration until some jackass, probably their own mother, told them this magic phrase, "It's just a game." That phrase, "it's just a game," is this week's inductee into the Raiderdamus Hall of Shade. The problem with this phrase is that, like all tautological statements, it is completely true while managing to be unhelpful and both condescending and reductivist at the same time. Yes, it is only a game, but that's like saying the pot roast you burn is only the family dinner, or that job you just lost is only a paycheck. To say it's only a game is to willfully ignore the reason people play games in the first place, and to reduce humanity to some sort of biological determinism to which we erroneously reduce animals. That being that all our actions should be about either survival or reproduction. The concepts of work and earning money fit neatly into both of these categories. But this casts humans as nothing more than robots who work and act according to mechanics and mindless programming. The root word of robot is the Greek word robota, which translates to slave labor. And humans all have an instinctive distaste for the idea that they are bound by slavery. Wars and revolutions have been fought over this. To tell someone it's just a game implies that it is of no importance, but the fact that a player gets angry at all shows that they care about it. And a thing's importance is measured by how much people care, making the statement, "it's just a game," illogical at best and abusive at worst. In 1795, the German philosopher Friedrich Schiller, in his work on the aesthetic education of man, argued that man plays only when he is in the full sense of the word a man, and is only wholly a man when he is playing. In the book of Genesis, man is cast from the Garden of Eden, and only then is informed by God that he must work the land to make his own food. It is clear then that work is in fact the most inhuman thing a person can do, the thing for which we are the least suited. Playing games is the antithesis of this, and it is here that we see people truly come alive and be their authentic self. Nobody takes a prospective partner on a date to do some work. They take them on a date to have fun. Why? Because it's the best way to get to know each other in a genuine way. Having fun is when you see the human soul laid bare. Being a human is difficult. It's an important part of our mental health to set down our burdens and play a game. It's important for humans to experience quality storytelling and exciting gameplay. It's important for us to save Princess Zelda, or to beat up M. Bison, or to hit homers off Yu Darvish on rookie mode. It's important to stomp out a bunch of Korean kids in StarCraft, or to shoot some 12-year-old in the face in Call of Duty and then teabag his corpse and tell him you had sex with his mother. Nobody ever climbed Mount Everest because it was beneficial to our biological imperatives of survival and reproduction, as it's hazardous to both. People climb Mount Everest because it was there. It was a challenge, and humans have a desperate need to avoid boredom and to make our lives interesting. In the absence of this, we are left only with the concept, life sucks and then you die. People do things that don't make sense because we inherently rebel against the idea that everything we do has to make sense. We do things that don't make sense because for us, the struggle for survival includes the struggle to give ourselves a life worth living. For the outside observer who is uninvested, the silly things we care about may seem worthless. Fighting a giant boss in Dark Souls may seem like the sort of bread and circuses used by Roman emperors to distract the people from more vital matters of state. Or a mid-October football game may seem unimportant because even if you're a huge fan of a particular team, it is just one game out of many. It may appear as though sports fandom is just the last vestiges of tribalism in a society where most folks don't have to actively defend their tribe from outside dangers. In cheering for a team dressed in the colors we have chosen to root for, it may be that, as the great philosopher Jerry Seinfeld once said, we are all just rooting for laundry. But this idea disregards the reason why most people get involved in all kinds of fandoms to begin with. In a world increasingly disconnected by our closeness to one another, community can be found in a shared love and devotion to a team, or a show, or a movie, or an artist and their works. These are quality of life measures that no amount of work can provide, but can only be found through the love of a community, a family of like-minded people. So yes, a game is only a game, but at the same time, it's everything. So fuck you, people who say it's just a game. Have fun missing the point, because it's the only fun you get. And that's the end of that.
Hell yeah. Come for the Raiders talk. Stay for the philosophy of the psychology of sport.
Absolutely.
I feel like I wrote that essay when I was in college. I took a psychology capstone when I was graduating, and one of the papers that I wrote was on sport and how that related in psychology. Shit. All right. And then later on, shame. Because sometimes I'm stupid. Okay. That was fantastic. And we will be back next week, Tuesday, 8 p.m. Pacific. I almost said Western. God, what is wrong with my brain? 8 p.m. Pacific time. We will have the State of the Nation, more Raiders news, more bullshit from the internet. We will have our Slayers of the Week. We will finish our wide receiver goats atop Mount Davis, and we will have another topic for the Hall of Shade, and it will be acerbic and biting, and we will say fuck you.
Absolutely, as always.
All right, I think we have an outro. Here it is. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.